I don't know. I'm very skeptical at like the supposed size of that cost. I think it's kind of it's just, I mean it's classically one of those things. Like you learn a lot by trying to teach someone else. I've seen it happen. That, somebody asks some seemingly benign question about like, oh, why was this, or why does it work this way, or something like this, and expecting like, oh, just like a brief like, oh, here's why, and it chases into, oh, we need to fix this big bug, or rework this, or oh wow, you found a giant performance bottleneck or something like that. So like, I don't know. I think there's something really, really valuable in like having somebody just come in and just like ask a bunch of questions. Like even if they're just off the wall, like you're just gonna learn so much doing that. And I'm just also really impressed by, in a encouraging environment, like in a world that's like not that kind of demotivating thing that you talked about, is people can really find a lot of ingenuity and motivation and creativity about this stuff. And so you can have supposedly junior folks being very productive very quickly in a world that wants it.
My name is Schalk Neethling, and this is the Mechanical Ink podcast, a podcast about open source, the open web, sustainability, and those who want to make the web and the world a better place. Hey, Daniel, and welcome to the Mechanical Ink podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great. I've been meaning to invite you for a while, and I don't know why I didn't. I think maybe I just thought like, Daniel's too busy. You won't have time to talk nonsense with me for an hour or so. But then I thought, you know what? And then I saw some of your posts, to be honest, that you shared on LinkedIn. And I was like, no, I need to speak with them. So I decided to invite you. So thank you for joining me. I'm looking forward to this discussion. It's like an area that I'm always curious about. I write stuff. I wouldn't consider myself like a technical writer. I would love to get better at it. And hopefully you can share some tips here that we can all use to get better at writing. Because I think it's like a core part of being a software engineer is being able to effectively communicate in writing. But before I blabber on and we dive into the topics, I'm going to hand the mic over to you and let you introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Daniel Beck. I'm a freelance technical writer. I live in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, but I'm American, and I've lived a bunch of other places besides. And I've been working in software documentation, especially like developer documentation, like pretty much my whole career. It's been like I've been very lucky to have like found like a nice niche for myself in this kind of world of getting to think about how we talk about software and what we do with it. Like more broadly, my work has like kind of been, or maybe more specifically rather, my work has been very much in like process and tools and the kind of like docs as code paradigm that people talk about sometimes, where you're it's writing, sure, but it's also a lot of programming, a lot of like thinking about the context for these kinds of things. So sometimes I struggle a little bit with the like how to talk about the work that I do, and so I fall back to on this joke, which is that I know how to write and I know how to program, so I just know lots of ways to use a semicolon.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. So you mentioned a couple of things there, process tools, stuff like that. And I oftentimes when I start looking and planning for the episode, I go to people's LinkedIn and I have a look at what I've been calling their LinkedIn tagline. And more often than not, they're super interesting. And then I just make it like the very first question. So your LinkedIn tagline, making tools, process, and content to reach developer audiences.
That's right.
Could you break it down for us and tell us more?
Sure. Well, truly, I think actually like the most important part of that is actually at the end, which is about audience. I really do try to like keep that in mind in all of the work that I do, whether that's writing docs or filing GitHub issues or building tools. It's like it's really about that audience, and like who we're trying to reach and like what we're trying to do for them, and so yeah, I think a lot about audience, and I think that like that's the end point, right? Is like it's where it meets those people, and so the tools and process and content, like that's the actual like. It's not, you can't just have just one. I think, you can write really wonderful, beautiful documentation. You can obsess over every last word of it. But if you don't have the tools and the process to get it to your audience, then it falls down. And likewise, like if you can't actually deliver the content, like then all the tools, all the cool fancy tools, that's also not there. So I think that tagline is really like an attempt to be uh, it's a balancing act to be specific about like the really like that you know I'm not just a writer. I'm kind of a systems person, but that it's all in service of reaching an audience.
Yeah, and I mean, so I've spoken to some people that you may know, Florian Schultz and
Oh, of
William
course.
Bamberg, and so they brought up this term called documentation engineering.
Hmm.
Is this thing that they were talking about? Because, for example, I mean, cat out of the bag. We used to work together at on MDN Web Docs, and
Of
this is
course.
also where Florian and Will fits into
Yeah,
the
yeah.
picture, and so. So we both have knowledge of the project and everything that happens there and the type of work that Will and Florian did on there, you did, I did. And so we know that there was much more to the job than just technical writing, right? There
Hmm.
was quite a lot more. And it touched on all those things you just mentioned. We talked about tools, and we wanted to make the tools to make it easier for people to contribute. We needed processes, and I think especially around the BCD project, there was a lot of work that you, Florian, and I think you and a bunch of folks did, that's paying off in dividends now that it's kind of like going between different hands, right? To have those
Yeah.
processes in place. But then at the end of the day, all of that was to reach the developers who are reading MDN Web Docs. So at the moment, there's this discussion going on in the design space around this, what they're calling a working definition, and they're calling it design engineering. Because I feel like they're feeling the same kind of push and pull, where it's like, yeah, I use Figma and I design, but I can code too, I think one of the other things that was always interesting to me is people always talk as if there's 3 engineers on the MDN Web Docs project. And I was also like, well, technically, if you look at the name that's next to the title that's next to your name, but those technical folks over there can also code really well, by the way. So that was always interesting for me. So I've said a whole bunch of stuff there, but maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe you can relate it to the MDN Web Docs project. Maybe you can go broader. It doesn't matter. But like, how did these things all like? How do you feel about this idea of what do you call yourself? Are you a documentation engineer, a technical writer, a documentation writer, all of those? And then what was the experience like? Like, what have you learned from all the work that was done on MDN Web Docs regarding tools and process?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I have a lot of angst about the job titles stuff. It's tough. I think to like on the one hand, like I like I don't know, like at a party or something. I like telling people that I'm a writer. Like that kind of sounds sort of intellectual and interesting in ways that like I don't know, like it's at least unusual, I think, to tell people that I'm a tech writer. Like that's not a terribly frequent job title, I think, like globally. But uh, like I have a little bit of like, I don't know, I feel like a fraud if I tell people I'm an engineer. Like I took some computer science courses at university. Like I know enough to talk like it, right? And I've been kind of steeped in this in kind of tech culture stuff. So like, but I also know that people are sensitive about titles and about like how like about qualifications and that kind of stuff. And so I think it can be really tough to try to find something that is like succinct and but also doesn't like step on toes and also doesn't devalue the work that like oh like if tech writer is not a good enough title, like what does that say about the tech writers that I really respect and really admire, and and yeah, so it's that like the what name to put on it is really challenging. And then there's like this other dimension to it, which is just that I feel like it's sometimes like uh, if you asked me like what title most accurately describes like what I'm doing, like it depends on which day of the week you catch me on. Some days it's very much like I'm writing, I'm thinking really hard about like the words, and other days it's about stakeholders and it's about finding about learning about the audience or doing these kind of like process oriented almost thinking like kind of almost as like a business person or something that like what value do we have to offer, that kind of stuff. And then other days um, uh, where I get to like just zone out and spend the whole day in my editor and debugging something or whatever. Then like okay, those days I feel a bit different. So I definitely like see the allure, especially of like documentation engineering. Like I think like uh, like that does like tick a lot of boxes, but it doesn't quite get all of them for me. So like I don't know that I would like be able to settle. Um, but like that experience at MDN, I think like that working with the various folks that with like a lot of different expertise, like bringing to that this big problem of like how do you document the web, like uh, yeah, it's like I there were so many things to work on and so many problems to solve that like I was attracted to all of them, and so it was such a cool environment to be like to learn from uh, folks on all these kinds of things. And so like you mentioned, like BCD, that's browser compat data, where we kind of took something that was historically very writer-y, authoring tables on pages and citations and these kinds of things, and turned it into a much more structured, much more engineered thing. And then, but there's also, you can look the other direction. There's, a lot of work on just like on style questions, content linting, figuring out like what do we actually want to do. Like that was as much an engineering problem as it was like a like direction problem, right? Like how do we actually want to communicate to the developers and to solve their problems for them, or at least help them solve those problems themselves. And yeah, like the stuff on MDN and like the kind of projects that I've gotten into, like as a consequence, like kind of around that and on the kind of the web platform generally, like it's such a rich area, um, and the fact that like so much of that stuff is open source makes it just like really unique. That like it's you can't get siloed as like, oh, I just do this one thing.
So, are there any like interesting things you took away, maybe in terms of process? Just talking about like open source broadly, maybe even. Maybe it's BCD specific. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's more broader. But just generally, like some things that you found that worked and some things that maybe didn't work where you had to backtrack.
Sure. I think a big lesson that I learned from MDN was like its scale. That like it just covers so much and has such a large audience, and um, and and has like an audience with like really widely different needs. It's like game developers trying to put their game in a browser to uh, you know how can you squeeze that extra uh, you know 10 or 15 milliseconds off a page load on an old phone on a janky network, right? Like like just the variety there. It taught me maybe not to be so precious about the individual pieces. And I think maybe browser compat data is like the most distilled form of that, which is like actually we're gonna like take out a lot of the 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 close kind of wordsmithing part of it, and we're going to turn this into um, a very restricted data set so that we can move a lot of things around a lot of like at once. I mean, we can communicate a lot of things, very succinctly, and so I think earlier in my career, like I worked on like products where there was like a relatively small thing to be concerned with, and so you had an API with a dozen endpoints, or you had this control panel that needed explaining like how to like, and it's like okay, like the domain for this is small, the audience you can know them very very closely, and you can do a lot of like really high effort things. You can be very meticulous about what words you put on the page. You can be very slow to publish. You can do a lot of things that are that don't make sense. Like the bigger audience gets, the bigger the surface area of the thing that you're documenting gets, and like don't get me wrong, I love absolutely love getting nerdy about words. It's still a very important thing to me, and I think it's something you can do really well, even in the context of like of not being precious about the words. But it taught me like a more like kind of pragmatic way to approach that kind of thing, and so I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've taken away from this. It's like that process thing. I don't know that I would have talked about process as like part of the way I thought about documentation as much as I would have like the kind of before and after effect of that experience.
Yep, no, for sure. And I think the precious aspect, I think that is something that most people, I'd go maybe as far as saying that most people struggle with, and I think it's a human nature, it's an ego thing, all that kind of stuff. But I have found that being involved in open source kind of forces you to not be, because you're working with so many people with such diverse backgrounds, and people also much smarter than you in some instances,
Yeah.
where it's like you really thought that you got this thing, like, wow, look at that code, that is tremendous, and then somebody comes like, if you do XYZ, it's like,
Yes.
darn it. And you have to have the humility to say, you know what, you're right, let's change it. I think that is one of the things that I've learned from like all the years at Mozilla and working in the open like constantly, is that immense, like, I don't know, feeling of constantly, like, on the one way it's kind of negative because it feels like you're being judged with every little thing you do, until you get to the point where you're like, this is not about judgment, this is about creating something amazing together, and it's not about any one individual, it's about the collective.
Yeah. Definitely. Like I don't know. I think it's kind of funny. I didn't even mention the open source part. Like it's so much like the air I breathe now. uh, but yeah, it's like I get what you mean about like judgment. Like especially early on, and especially like when I started participating in MDN, like it was still a wiki, and so it felt like a high wire act of like, oh, if I type into this text box like well, maybe not a second, it was a little slower then, but pretty soon it was going to be live, and like people were gonna see what I did, and people could go into the little edit history like and go, oh no, revert that, like and you had like that little that little kind of tedious back and forth sometimes with people like reverting and then unreverting and that kind of thing, and in some ways like it was a real like cultural shift like for MDN to get into like GitHub and like where you have like kind of names attached to stuff much more explicitly um, and I found that really enjoyable. Like I think you're right that like it is not about judgment. It is about the thing that you were doing together. And now that I've done this quite a while now, I get like I have this like radar now of like I can tell when people are in fact being judgmental and being kind of unpleasant, and but like 99% of the time it's not that. It is genuinely about the stuff that you're doing, and and in lots of ways that's freeing too, because if you're like toward the beginning of my career, I worked on a project where I was the only tech writer, and I was pretty much the only person who touched the docs, and like it was kind of on me. And like when somebody found a mistake, like that felt very personal, and where like in open source, it's like, oh, there's a mistake here. How can we like work together to make that not part of our process, that like mistakes like this come through, and um, and so yeah, the open source dimension really adds something, though that's a tough thing to get into early on. It's just it doesn't square with like the way the way you teach people to write or to program. Like it's very much go away, work by yourself, that kind of thing, and it doesn't have that kind of um, collaborative aspect as strongly in the way we learn how to do things. And so I can. It's interesting now, just like reflect briefly, like oh, I've come a ways on my relationship to this stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like there was a period of time where I worked with some clients, and of course their stuff is not open source, and it feels foreign. You like do stuff that people are like, you can't do that, and you'd be like, what do you mean I can't? Oh, sorry, yeah, I forgot. You have to like stop yourself. Yeah, it's a different world, and you can get sucked into it pretty quickly. There's something you mentioned there that I want to dig into in a bit, but before we do, I find myself in a situation where I'm looking for a job at the moment, and I think if you speak to 10 people in tech right now, at least half of them will also be in the same boat as me. We're going through a very interesting time where there's so many layoffs, so many people that's lost their jobs, and as a result, there's a lot of people in the market. So finding something is really, really hard. So you've been in what you want to call it, contracting, consulting, freelancing, whichever term fits, for the better part of 6 years now, if not longer. And from having tried it myself, I have to caveat that with the fact that I have a special skill of choosing the worst time to decide to freelance. It's like, oh, the economy's tanking. Let me start my own business. Great timing. But leaving that aside, it does feel like maybe this idea of going your own way and building your own thing, whether you call it freelancing, consulting, contract for hire, doesn't really matter. The fact remains is the onus is on you to find work, to do good work, and to continue to find work. Do you think this might be something that is just going to be more and more prevalent? And do you have any advice for people who are thinking of attempting something like this?
Oof. There's a lot there. So one, I will preface. I will put my own caveats here, right? To say that like I've had a very charmed like career as somebody doing contracting and freelance work, and like I've been very lucky to not have to do a lot of the hustle for work. Not none, but uh, like yeah, I genuinely attribute it to luck. That I've just kind of lined up work like kind of one thing after the other, and that has worked out well for me. And I've also, I mean, I guess maybe the part that I am like responsible for is that like I've had clients come back to me and like want to keep working with me, and so I think that is something is a surprisingly like underrated quality in like a freelancer, especially, is like doing what you say you're going to do, and then, or like saying what you're going to do, like clearly, and then actually doing that thing. Like apparently that's a rare talent than one might like. So yeah, I think um, kind of more broadly, like, is this something that like other people will be doing more of, or should be doing more of, or could be? Um, I think there's some dimensions, at least to the work that I've had, that is like uh, in some ways it lends itself toward having somebody kind of slot into a specific thing to do, and with the knowledge that it's like that's specific to a project, or that is very it's specific to a very narrow skill or domain knowledge, uh, or it's to a specific circumstance and time. I've worked on projects where it's like, oh, we need a writer for this period of time because someone with similar skills to you is, unavailable because of, life circumstances or whatever. And so like knowing your own sense of like how well you fit that model of like that you come in and you bring something specific, and that um, and I think that is a little bit different from like I think the things that make that work well, and like the kind of skills and disposition is somewhat different from like, oh, you're going to join an organization and you're going to be part of that organization, and you're going to be part of that like kind of ongoing process of like not just doing the work, but like defining the work, setting direction, doing those things that you actually like as a as a freelancer or contractor or whatever. Like that's another area where I have a hard time with like terminology, where like some of that stuff is like at arm's length from you, and you receive information about those things, but you're not actually like participating in them, at least not in um, not in like overt ways, uh, and that can be um, that kind of like, and that can like sometimes result in the kind of very mercenary sort of attitude of like, all right, that's that's a thing that happens over there and has nothing to do with me, and as long as the check's clear or whatever, like that's not genuinely like, I mean, I like to do work that I like to do, and so I don't often have that feeling toward it, but I also do, I do have to have like a little bit of detachment about it, right? That like the 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 OKRs or whatever, like I don't write those. I just have to help people be successful, and it's like, but like I guess that's the thing, right? If you are interested in that kind of that aspect of that, I think the other, I think the goal setting and especially like management, right? Like if that is an area that appeals to you, like as a contractor, as a freelancer, it's really really hard to participate in those things, and at least kind of in the world of like technical documentation and that sort of stuff. And so if those things appeal to you, like I think that work will still continue to exist, and I think and there are people who are really great at it, and they should do that. And these kind of supposed uh, uh, I don't know, the being your own business thing, like that requires a different kind of executive vision, and that's not. I don't think that's necessarily appealing to everybody. And so, like, I think, I guess my to now that I've talked my way in circles here, I think maybe the thing is like to think about your own strengths and your relationship to the work, and like what you've been successful at in the past, what you haven't been successful at in the past, and use that to figure out where you need to be headed, because I think it is ultimately about that a lot more than like yeah, nobody is like an interchangeable. Like, it's not like, oh yeah, there's 100 tech writers and they're all like approximately equivalent. I don't think that's right. And like, same for software engineers and for designers and for product managers and like all that stuff. Like nobody is truly a cog, and I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that sets us apart from the machines, right? Is the fact that you bring your own bit of creativity. And creativity is everywhere. Like, a lot of people forget that there's creativity in how you run a project, as a product manager or a product owner. Like, how you approach it could be uniquely you. You might have some different ideas about how you do that kind of thing. You might think like, I'm going to make this whole new blend of things from that. I take a little bit of Scrum, a little bit of Agile, a little bit of Kanban, and I'm going to make my own thing. And that is kind of where like the machines still fall short, is that ability to think outside the box and be able to think like this. Just because it's been done this way for millennia, it doesn't have to continue to be done this way. And I think that's why things evolve. That's why things get better, sometimes worse, and then gets better again. It's just because we're creative people and we try different things. Jumping back to open source, and touching on what you've mentioned a bit earlier about the fact that this whole collaborative aspect around open source isn't very common to how we learn, or in the early days when you're just starting as a software developer or a technical writer or whatever. It's like you said, it's like, here's a bunch of stuff, go away, do it, come back and show me what you've done, as opposed to this constant feedback loop that happens in open source. With that said, I personally feel like open source can play a massive role in people's careers in general. And I'm kind of want to sell people on the idea that, especially when you're a junior,
Sure.
I have some ideas there that I'd like to explore myself, to help folks who perhaps, I think the experience aspect is one thing that open source can help you with. And the other aspects are the soft skills that more often than not, you're not taught. You can only learn them by actually interacting with other people. But with that said, the reason I'm kind of long way talking about this is you wrote a post called Starving for Docs that kind of talks about this topic, but from a technical writer's perspective, and where there's some caveats and little niggly things involved here from a technical writer perspective. And of course, I cannot talk from that perspective, so I would love to hear from you what you've learned and found from that to help me understand that side of the coin a little bit better.
Sure. Yeah. So for your listeners who haven't read my blog post, I talked a bit about this idea, this myth, as I put it, that technical writers can sort of, there's this relationship that could exist between tech writers and open source projects, where that supposedly there's a bunch of open source projects that don't have good documentation, and there's a bunch of tech writers who want experience with either specific tools or to write about technology or whatever, and that the tech writers can kind of swoop in and give these open source projects docs, and that both sides will be kind of very grateful for what would come out of that. And I think this is especially common, I think, as like it's kind of one of those resume keyword stuffing kind of exercise, like, oh yeah, you need to have API doc experience on your resume, or you need to have GitHub, or this or that, and so, okay, you'll just find a project, because there's a million of them that are starving for documentation, and you're gonna roll up and you're gonna be like, hello, here I am the tech writer that's gonna solve this problem, and everyone will be really happy with this, and this is like this is this just doesn't happen. At least not in the way that like people talk about this, right? Like, oh, you want to build up your experience, go find an open source project, because one, it's so easy to find open source projects that need a particular skill set or anything like that, right? Or to find open source projects where the maintainers can take on like a sudden influx of new contributions. I don't think I just didn't think that was a real thing that happened. And I thought, one, that this sort of idea that occasionally gets planted about this, with especially junior tech writers, was like setting people up for failure. That like they were gonna set out to do this, and then like feel like it was their fault when, oh yeah, this like Byzantine build system that you have to like understand before you can contribute anything, like that's on you, or when you open a pull request with a bunch of changes and then you hear nothing, like, oh, like that, like, well, you goofed. I didn't believe that, and I believe that those things happen, and that, but it was coming from this well-intended, like, I don't think anyone's trying to like pull any tricks or do anything mean-spirited here. It's just like people have an idea of how open source works, and then there's like the reality. And so I wrote a bit about that, and about like the kind of motivations you need to bring to doing open source documentation work, and what that would look like if it is like, one, there's this myth, and then two, what would it look like if you actually did this in a way that is going to yield results, not just for yourself, but also for the open source project, and is going to like produce a relationship that you like. And so I talk a little bit about that in the write-up, and I really talk about like that you can't come to a project expecting, or with the expectation that you are going to produce lots of documentation. That if you show up with that as your motive, like, I mean, lots of people can just fill text files full of words, but you'll find that is like going to be a painful experience. What won't be so painful is if you approach it as, I want to develop a relationship with these maintainers, with the community of users, with the people who need support, like all that stuff, and finding that you have a relationship to the thing that goes deeper than, I want to write some code, or I want to write some documentation, or whatever it is, and I think like, again, like thinking to like kind of like junior developers, junior tech writers, that kind of stuff, where the big glamorous thing of like, you're going to land this like massive patch or whatever, like, no. You're going to start really small. You're going to fix a typo. You're going to work through the README and file an issue because something's broken that no one's looked at in 2 years. You're gonna start small, and you're going to be focusing on your collaboration skills, which I think is the actual thing that you can learn doing open source stuff, like as a learning exercise, right? Like, what you're really going to learn is how to work well with others.
100%. And that's exactly what I was referring to with those soft skills, is this whole thing. And I mean, if you speak to anybody who's been in tech for a while, you will quickly learn that is almost more of what you do than the actual writing of code, the actual writing of docs, that kind of thing, is talking to people and coming to a common understanding of what it is that we need to do, and what is the logical next step, and how do we break this big thing down into smaller actionable steps, and then how do we execute on it successfully. And all of that needs communication. And in today's vastly, primarily almost distributed world, being able to do that over video or text on Slack or something like that is critical. Being able to understand, like, how do we not lose this conversation that we've had? Don't put your links in the Google chat, like when we have a Google Meet, because when we close this window,
Yes.
It's all gone. Let's have a doc that we all type in, and we can have it there, and then we can take it from there. I remember, who was this that I did that with? It was one of the teams at Mozilla that I attended a couple of meetings at, and they had this cool thing where during the meeting, they obviously have somebody that's main responsibility is to take notes, which is important because then you don't have to worry so much about talking. You can just listen. And so they take notes throughout the whole meeting. And then at the end, like everybody goes away and like 2 or 3 people stay behind, and they take all those notes and they make a little blog post out of it and they publish it because everything's in the open, right? So now other people can go see it's been kind of thought through and broken down into these are the most important things. These are the action steps. And this takes you on the road to creating those issues, those project board entries, and those kind of things that's going to drive your next 2 or 3 weeks, whatever your cycles are. And I thought that was just like, whoa, more teams should probably do that.
Yes, that's cool. The publishing aspect, like that's something I haven't seen a lot of firsthand. And I'm always very jealous of like teams that have like basically like a newsletter or something. I wish that's something I could bring more into my work, of like that kind of regular distillation of what's going on, because that's maybe that's like relationships and culture and things like those are really those take a long time to develop, like especially like open source projects. Like if you want to, if you're going to have a relationship with a project and with the maintainers of that project, well, like you can't, like there's no there's definitely no README for that on most projects, and to be able to read into that a little bit is just like, that's just such a powerful thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. That is definitely a big like organizational thing, right? This doesn't just happen by chance.
Right.
This is very methodically thought through. They've probably tried multiple different tactics that totally failed and eventually landed on something that worked. They might have tried a thing where at the end just everybody goes away and it'll be everyone's responsibility to come back and edit the doc. And that's not going to happen because your day-to-day is going to suck you up and you're going to forget about it. The staying behind and being committed to doing that I think is one of the things that made the difference. And that didn't happen from day one. No way. I will not believe that that's true. I've been in too many such experiments that I know it doesn't happen the first time. The other interesting thing was when you talked about the fact where like you're a maintainer of a project, and it kind of reminded me of, okay, like in a positive sense, but what happened to a lot of maintainers during the bad days of Oktoberfest, where it's I hate October now because thank you for ruining the month that had Halloween in it. Now I hate October because it'll be this influx of just junk. And you'd have to now you can't just assume it's all junk because there might be some gems in between there, right? So now you have to look through all of this. But I think that is a valid thing. It's like maintainer burnout is real. We know that. It's a big problem in open source right now. We're trying to solve it, but it's going to take a long time. But I think where this succeeds and where this is good for junior developers or technical writers, people contributing documentation, is when you join a project, organization, or community that has this built in. And I think the Chaos community is doing a great job of this. They're inviting junior people, but they actually have somebody running this and making sure you know where to go, how to contribute, holding their hand through the process. It's like if you're at a company and you employ junior developers, what people often forget is that there's a there's a cost to doing that, because you do have to give up some of your senior and mid-level engineering staff's time to help guide this person, because they have to find their feet in a fast-moving place that they're completely new to. They're going to have questions. And if every time the answer is, I'm too busy, they're going to feel demotivated. They're not going to want to do it. And you're going to have to find something because they're going to move on. The organizations that succeeds in is where they are aware that we're taking on juniors, but we're thinking long-term. We're thinking we're going to skill this person up to our next senior staff, and they're going to have all this institutional knowledge, and it's going to be awesome. But there's an upfront cost to this. And I think this plays out in open source as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm very skeptical at like the supposed size of that cost. I think it's kind of it's I mean, it's classically one of those things. Like you learn a lot by trying to teach someone else, and like I've seen it happen that somebody asks some seemingly benign question about like, oh, why was this, or why does it work this way, or something like this, and expecting like, oh, just like a brief like, oh, here's why, and it chases into, oh, we need to fix this big bug, or rework this, or oh wow, you found a giant performance bottleneck or something like that. So like, I don't know. I think there's something really, really valuable in like having somebody just come in and just like ask a bunch of questions. Like even if they're just off the wall, like you're just going to learn so much doing that. And I'm just also really impressed by like I think in a encouraging environment, like in a world that's like not that kind of demotivating thing that you talked about, is it's people can really find a lot of ingenuity and motivation and like creativity about this stuff. And so you can have supposedly junior folks being very productive very quickly in a world that wants it.
No, for sure. That's 100% what I was alluding to, is like you have to be like, if you're a junior and you're looking, like culture is one of the most important things you almost have to look at, because that's gonna like set the tone for your entire experience at this company. If you can, like, you have to ask those questions. Like, I understand that I'm new and I'm young and I'm still inexperienced. So I'm going to be, relying on a lot of people that's been at the company for a while to help guide me through this. I might have some silly questions. I might, whatever, how do you handle that internally? And if there's no good answer that makes you feel good about it, then it's probably not a good idea to start your career there. And that's one of the things that's just so hard. Like, I don't have an answer for that, because if you're a junior and you're looking for a job, it's almost like anybody that's willing to give you a job, you'll just do. So now me saying like, you need to be picky and you need to think about the culture is like, dude. So yeah, it's important, but I understand if you sometimes just need to get to work.
Yeah. I think pickiness is hard, right? Like saying no to stuff especially in an environment where it's a take it or leave it kind of thing. Like that's hard. But I think being circumspect can be really, really helpful thing for people to know, that like, no, your first job is not going to be it's not going to be ideal, because no job is ideal. And you're going to find that there's lots of stuff that like you're going to learn and value and appreciate, and then there's going to be some other stuff that you're going to go, no, I'm not going to bring this with me to my next job. And it goes like for yourself too, even, right? Like that you're going to find things that you think are really like you're gonna discover things about yourself that like, oh yeah, this is a good application of my skills, or like this is a valuable behavior to bring to this work. And then you go into a different context and find that, oh, actually, that was that was a a broken thing for a broken system, or it was a very specific adaptation to a very specific set of circumstances that doesn't translate. And I've been thinking a lot about this. In kind of tech writing circles, there's been this discussion around like docs as code as a way of approaching the world, and in some ways, like almost like I don't want to overstate it here, but like almost a backlash to it, and I've been seeing some of that, like going like, like I don't know, like I still feel very positively toward it, and but now I'm appreciating that conversation because I'm recognizing there are things about that I appreciate about it that aren't like that I appreciate it because it's like intrinsically a good thing, but that it fits the kind of culture and like the social context where that it is valuable even if it's maybe not like the fastest, most efficient way to do a particular thing, and so yeah, like I think reminding folks that like even if you're like a supposed expert in stuff that like you're still gonna learn things, and so yeah, that's where I can't help people find great jobs or do that kind of thing. Like I don't know that like I'm any better equipped to do that than like I don't know. Please go talk to an HR professional or something, right? But I think I never feel bad telling people about like things that they can learn about.
Well said. So, some specific projects that you're involved in. At the end of May somewhere, I'm going to be speaking with Kadir, who you might know also.
Yes.
And we're going to be speaking about baseline. I think that's going to be the primary topic we're going to talk about. And just so happens that you're involved with that as well as this other thing that's tangentially related called web features. So I would love for you to tell us more about baseline web features. Are they related? If they're related, how are they related? And what is your role in all of this?
Yeah, no, outstanding, Schalk, to bring together like so many different threads here. We're talking about browser compact data. We're going to talk about MDN. It's going to be so good. So the I think the flashy thing here is baseline. Baseline is an indicator for web platform features that basically tells you is this thing, can you use this? It kind of, it speaks toward, that can I use this question. Also collaborating with Alexis of can I use, it's absolutely not a competitor here. It speaks to that question of functionally, does your browser support this thing? And it also looks at a little bit this other dimension, which is can the audience of web users use this feature? That is, if you build something that uses this, well, sure, it will work on your machine, but will it work on theirs? And tries to kind of model a little bit the kind of curve of browser uptake, right? So a feature of the web platform that is baseline, it gets this little kind of icon. It comes in a blue or a green flavor. The blue flavor says that it is interoperable across several major web browsers. And we asked, we talked to web developers and we talked to kind of a pretty broad community about what that set of browsers should be, and then so that happens kind of on the day that the last of those browsers ships that feature, and then sometime later there's an actual date cutoff, but I think the date's not as important because we tuned that date to kind of cover the overwhelming majority of kind of measurable web users, though that measurement part is very challenging. But we have an educated guess about this that says after some time has elapsed, that it becomes sort of widely available is the term that we've been using, and that is when you can pretty much use that thing without needing to really think terribly hard about polyfills or transpilation or all those strategies that we use to make stuff work in older browsers that don't support those things directly. So that is baseline. The other, I guess the cool thing here, and this is where it kind of points off into other things, is we are using data from browser compat data to try to like calculate these things. We're doing some work on like categorization and organization. That's where web features comes in. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, we can do that. But the other cool thing about this is baseline is intended to be something that if you are talking about web platform features on the web, in a conference talk, on a podcast, what you got there, that you can talk about those features as being baseline. So today, I know for a fact that there are banners on MDN that if you go to certain pages that we have baseline data about, it'll show you if it's widely available or if it's recently available or if it is not yet baseline. Or you can also go on Can I Use. Some features on Can I Use have this indicator, and we're increasing our coverage like on an almost daily basis. And that is pretty cool. But we are already seeing and are really excited to see more like places where this can show up. And this is the big thing that I think gestures in the direction of web features, which is like having common identifiers for talking about those features, so that you know which baseline status to pull up. So that's baseline. That's not. Genuinely, I think I really need to work on the elevator pitch there. That was a long ride to the penthouse, but that is that's what I think about when I think about baseline.
Yeah, I'm so happy that this exists. I mean, I just can imagine like it's one of those things where like how it's like a cell phone like nowadays, right? If you're like, how did we ever survive without these things? I mean, to some extent, maybe in some ways we were better off, but for the most part, it's a good thing, right? Baseline is pretty much like all good. Like I just like there was so many times I know in developers' lives where you were like, can I use this bloody thing? What does 76% of the world mean to me?
Right.
So being able to look at this thing and say, green, nice, I'm using it. I think it's magnificent. And I so appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this, because I was involved in the very first, I'm not even going to call this a try at this, just a conversation about maybe. I think we spend more time designing what it will look like than really digging into, cool, that looks beautiful. But the hoops we have to jump through to make that thing show the right data? Like I started looking at that and I had so many questions. Like, when is it red? There's no easy way. When is it green? What does that even mean? But wait a minute, like in CSS, whoa, this property is merely one thing of this larger thing called grid or flexbox or animation. So just this thing being widely available does not make grid widely available. Bad example because grid landed as one thing, but being that as it may, there's caveats even in that one. But yeah, so and I have a sneaky suspicion web features is kind of trying to address that part of it.
Yeah. So, well, here briefly, one additional thing about baseline is that like it's like an indicator, right? Like you look for that green, that's helpful. But it's also not like, it's like a traffic light. If you see the green, I mean, yeah, like you're meant to go, but like that still means you need to look around and and watch out for surprises. Like we don't expect that baseline is a substitute for thinking deeply about who your users are and how they differ from just kind of the kind of maybe a large scale aggregate of web users, right? Like that's a different thing and something to think about. But but yeah, baseline baseline stands on the shoulders of giants for sure. And it would be literally impossible without browser compat data if there was just not a good, very structured, very finely sliced view of what does and doesn't work in each browser. Like you just couldn't do this, and so there's that part of it. Web features kind of takes, in some ways, it is um, like it is not it is it builds on top of that some more as well, where like browser compat data has this sense of like, oh yeah, a feature has this very specific shape, right? It's a specific method on an API. It's a specific value of a CSS property. But like as you mentioned, that's part of a constellation of things. And so where like BCD knows about the individual stars, Web Features tries to describe the constellations. And I'm coming up with this metaphor on the fly here, and now I'm really in love with it because it turns out like deciding like which specific stars are in your constellation. There's like a matter of interpretation there, and kind of thoughtful editorializing, I think, around that. And as we add more and more features into web features, as we describe more and more stuff of the web platform, finding like, oh, where do we draw the outline of this is challenging, and it's really interesting work as well. But yeah, that's web features tries to like kind of capture these higher level groups, especially these groups that are like cross boundaries. So you can imagine something like web components where you need custom elements, you need ECMAScript modules, you need maybe you need shadow DOM, maybe you need all these all these things, right? Well, that's like and so like you've got sort of a Venn diagram there of like, oh, this is a feature, but then there's this encompassing feature. There's kind of different dimensions to this, and so we're trying to capture those things that like other representations of features can't really speak to. And like in some ways here we're inspired by and also like collaborating with Can I Use, where like Can I Use really does really well like talking about those high level features. And again, talking about them in ways that web developers care about. There's this whole other world, if you really are interested, about like web platform tests and like vendor like development of browsers. Like they have a very different view of the world, right? And spec authors have a different view of the world, and like so we're very focused on kind of web developers. What are the functional units of the web platform that web developers can use? And so Web Features is trying to do that, and it's trying to do that in a very like collaborative, descriptive way. So, for instance, we have a grid feature that points to a Can I Use identifier, right? So we're saying this is the same thing. And then we also list out, or rather nowadays, BCD points into web features. It says, hey, these specific keys inside of browser compat data are, part of that grid feature. And so now we can tell this nice story, right? We can say like, yes, BCD tells us grid has been supported since a certain date across all these browsers that we care about, and or rather that web developers care about, and that we can then point that over to Can I Use, and so Can I Use can we can calculate a baseline status. We can Can I Use can pull up that baseline status, and we all know that we're all talking about the same thing. And we can link to a specification to know that we're, again, here's the main entry point into the specification to help you learn more about, why this works the way it does and that kind of stuff. And we're excited to see this show up in other ways. I know a little bit of work has been done so that like web platform tests can reference web features. I think some of the Chrome folks are considering having like associating their kind of like the Chrome status stuff where they talk about like what's shipped in this version, like again linking into web features. I think some work has been done around that as well. So there's a lot of like exciting stuff there about like describing the web, and we have ambitions of being comprehensive and trying to cover as much of the platform as we can. So I'm really excited about it, and when I say we, I mean this very broadly. A lot of really smart folks are working on this. I get to work with Florian Schultz on a pretty regular basis, collaborating on like the kind of browser compat data stuff, and also on just describing the features. He's done some amazing work, especially on like JavaScript already. Like he's basically, I don't know, he's done the work there already. It's amazing. I'm working with Kadir on kind of baseline and web features, and making sure web features is a tool that can like support that and like in an enduring way. Working with an engineer on the Chrome team, Philip Jagenstadt, and he's doing some some great work, helping kind of think through like the boundaries of different features. Those are the people I work most closely with, but like there's this great set of people, and if people are interested in participating in this, there's the WebDX community group as part of the W3C. So and we now have like weekly calls where we try to unpack some of this stuff. And the WebDX group has like another work stream, like web features is kind of one, but then they're also doing work on like kind of researching the developer experience. So like finding out what web developers think of these things. It's really hard to talk about just like any one part of this, like in any kind of like constrained way, because it does kind of spider out to so many other things. But that's the web features view of the world.
Amazing. And I mean, there's no way on the web I think you can talk about anything in isolation. I think the very nature of the web is everything is somehow connected, right? It's how the whole thing works, is everything's connected in some way, shape, or form. That's how we get around. That's how we find things. I'm curious now, because now we're like BCD all over the show here, but I'm going to pull it in again. Would you say that browser compat data, is that code as docs? Docs as code? Or neither?
It might be docs as data. I think it might be something like that. But yeah, it is docs as code. I think it certainly comes under that like umbrella of treating your documentation assets as like as you do code assets, right? Like so using the tools and processes associated with that. I think that is part of it for sure. It's also code as docs. There's a lot there that now. Earlier in browser compat data's history, I would have said less so, but there's increasingly like more and more. Open Web Docs has done some amazing work on what's called the collector, and making that a routine part of updating browser compat data. So like more and more, it's like, oh, a new release of a browser comes out, and there's like an automatically generated pull request that says, here are the new things. We're getting we're getting definitely into using code to generate facts about the world that then turn into documentation that shows up in a lot of places, and so that's a big part of it. But I mean, we seeing that as data as well is really kind of interesting, because then it becomes also things that you can have appear in places that aren't even like what you might think of as documentation. So you can imagine in your editor, I think it would be really amazing someday for to have this kind of like the aggregate baseline status of like as you type, like you see the little indicator show up when you use a property for the first time in a CSS file. Like that would be magic, right? But that's something you could only do if your docs are really a kind of a little piece of data that you can interrogate and use to say other things. I think maybe things that even that like don't have any kind of authorial intent behind them, right? One of these other job titles that comes up is like technical author, and I like that one too. It's pretty common in the UK, and I think sometimes about that distinction between what is authored and what is maybe generated or derived from other sources. So yeah, yes, and maybe not at all is to answer your question.
So it depends, is what you're trying
Yes.
to say. Perfect. Before we get into a potentially, I don't know, sticky situation, do you see AI play a role in what we've just discussed? Like this whole like data aspect of the web features and baseline and interrogating all of that and deriving something from it, generating something from it?
Um, I've played a bit with AI tools, at least like the kind of big name ones. I'm still finding my way there in terms of like what is productive and um, like what is useful, what is valuable, um, and like what's worth the kind of costs. Like it's one of those things uh, like what can take you into or out of the work, and um, I know like I don't want to like rehash like other potential like I know, like everybody wants to talk about the ethics of AI stuff or the environmental like all that kind of stuff, but like also like the ergonomics of this stuff is like not always amazing, and so I think um, like it hasn't found a way into my work process as like a routine thing yet. I don't know, maybe ever, who knows? I'm bad at predictions, so I won't do that. Um, but I would like to see like it comes up from time to time. People go, oh, like well, maybe we can stick AI on this problem, and but I've yet to like, or at least um, I don't have the I haven't like imagined yet the way to make that work. And um, so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see maybe folks who have spent more time with the AI stuff than I have to see how this might work out. Um, that said, I'm a little skeptical, given that yes, uh, the um, the web platform's big and all, but there's also uh, like this aspect of like it's actually not that many things. So it's not like there's like this like sophisticated, or not even it's not like a statistical problem, right? It is much more about like how do we reason about these things, and that's something that the AI tools are show some difficulty around. So, but I'm I won't never say never. I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. And then the sticky one is the fact that, I mean, this as much as this applies to what I'm about to say, this is being hashed to death when it comes to developers. And it's this idea that, you know what, just point an AI at my code and it'll write the documentation for you. And I'm like, okay. Have you heard this
Oh yeah.
fairy tale? And what do you think of that fairy tale?
um, I think there's a long history of generating docs from code, right? Or like docs, in a sense, right? Like there's air quotes. I'm sorry, if you're listening. Uh, uh, like I think actually, like I don't know. I think back to like Java doc as like the probably not the original thing of that, but like to me it feels like very foundational to that kind of thing where it's like okay you've got okay it'll tell you type annotations and you'll pull out some doc comments and all that kind of stuff, and those things are fine and helpful and I hesitate to say good, but they're like they do a job, and they have done a job for I don't know 30 years. Uh, these things have existed, and no one's ever like, oh man, I wish I had an even more Java doc, right? And that's because ultimately, I think what those are sort of fancy code viewers. That they slurp up code and they spit out stuff that's like kind of like code-ish. And what those things lack, and like don't get me wrong, like I've written those like doc comments, right? Like I've been there. Like you can bring a lot of care and attention to those, but what you really are missing in that is like context and setting the scene, and so much of that like is about your relationship to the person who's telling you these things. And I'm one thing that makes me skeptical of like the point the AI at and at the code and get some docs out is that what you're getting there is like has no intent like with it in a kind of serious way, I think. That like once you've put enough thought into the prompt or whatever to get the docs out, they're like, well, you're already doing the work of a tech writer at that point. So and you're gonna and then you're gonna have to do the work on the other side of that, which is like to read it and to edit it. And I think there are marginal gains to be had in that of the actual like type stuff out part of this. In the same way that JavaDoc can helps you with layout and helps you pull out the things that are public and the things that are private, or separate that from the stuff that's private and things like that. Like that stuff will happen, and those tools will be helpful. And I think part of the toolbox that we have for producing excellent documentation. But like the kind of idea of like, oh yeah, you're just gonna not have anybody be sitting there thinking about what this code is for and what role it has in the world, like. Yeah.
Agreed.
I have one more hot take on this.
Yeah, go
which
for
is
it.
like, I know like there's a lot of angst amongst tech writers, like and some fear even like of like, oh, this is gonna take our jobs, and maybe it will take some jobs, but it will take the jobs of people who see it as their job to produce sequences of words. It'll take that work. Those LLMs they are good at generating text. Like that is very good at that. But like it has never been the limiting factor in my work of like how quickly I can produce words. It was always in how could I learn valuable things about the audience, or how could I connect the subject matter experts with the folks who can come up with a metaphor to explain something, or like to do all those things. That is the real work, and that the text part. And I think, I mean, I'm sure, I imagine that like software developers have a similar experience of like, it's it's not how quickly you can type that is keeping you from shipping something great.
Generally, you don't want to type too quick because you're gonna be debugging a hell of a lot. So I mean, for me, like whenever I write something, one of the hardest parts for me that I really have to take time and think about is writing example code that has a real life counterpart. I just writing foo bear baz whatever thing is like dime a dozen, but I've never found those useful to me. And I always take the time to think, okay, let me try and think of a real world thing and like write something around that. I haven't tried asking the LLMs for that, but I have a sneaky suspicion that I'm going to be great at doing that kind of thing. If you just want examples that's like a generic use case of this, like JavaScript API, sure, it'll spit that out for you. But I'm thinking if you want to connect it to an actual real world use case that you can, oh, cool, I can actually use this, I don't think it's going to be so great at that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
So you have this other thing, if you go on your website, and there's some stuff you can sign up for, some stuff you can subscribe to, and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things you can grab there is this thing called the 30-minute information rescue. What is that?
Yes. So yeah. So if you head over to my website, it's ddbeck.com, and you can sign up for my mailing list, which is not terribly frequent, but you get as part of the sign up a little guide that I wrote, kind of towards um, this problem. I think that we have maybe I don't know. I feel like I experience it a lot, but and maybe especially in kind of the current environment of like, okay, you have a colleague and they're leaving to greener pastures or to retirement or because we live in a tough world, and whatever the reasons, they've got some information in their heads that is not in some documentation or is not linked up to things where you know it, and you have a very limited amount of time to get that information from them. And so this came out of like a real like client experience that I had where a client said like, hey, I've got this person that it's their last week on the team. They're going to grad school or something, and so it's like, okay, like they're doing this really cool thing with our tools, and we want to capture this information and maybe even like turn into a blog post or something. And so I got like kind of like, okay, this is the setup, and oh, by the way, this person can only give you a half hour of their time to learn about how to do this. And so I put a lot of thought and effort into like being prepared to go into that call, to get as much as I could in that 30 minutes, and just sort of with the knowledge that like there probably wouldn't be a lot of follow up, and so from that experience, from some similar experiences, just like we're doing some writing projects where like, okay, yeah, I get a call 1 hour maybe with somebody, and like it's burdensome to do follow up or to schedule other things, and so I've kind of distilled a set of questions that will help you get the most out of that time, and then along with that, some tips on how to like set the scene for that. So what kind of some tools and some table setting you can kind of do to make sure that conversation goes really well and that you get the most key critical things out of that, because you're not going to come away with knowing everything, but you might come away knowing the most important thing.
Yeah, I can see how that can be extremely helpful in a lot of scenarios. I think in going back to the open source thing, I think there's also value in that. Like if somebody is leaving the project and like you want to take over, like they might have limited time. It could also be something that you just think about, like in general, like should I decide to give this thing up? What is information that I should really be writing down? Kind of have that 30-minute interview with yourself kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be something to do from time to time, especially if you find yourself having spent 12 years at a company, maybe every now and again sitting down and saying like, let me interview myself. Let me ask these questions of myself and see if I've written all this stuff down. And on the same line, so I created this little, what do you call it? GitHub repo template thingy called Chilin. And the idea is, so for the longest time, I had a look at the CNCF. They've got this great project template. We like forked off of that to create a lot of the stuff that they use on MDN now when they start a new project, or that we've integrated into existing projects. But the problem with that one for me was, while it's very like, it's meant for really big projects with a lot of moving parts. It's got governance docs. It's got like contributor ladder. That can be useful quite soon in a project, but not day one, right? Like you might think about it, but you don't necessarily want to include it. So this one is meant to be like, whenever you're starting an open source project, this is probably a good place to start. Like just start your project from this template repository and you'll have all the basic things you need. Core to that whole thing is the README. Now, you have some thoughts around READMEs.
Yes.
I have a very interesting other idea, but we'll talk about that at some other opportune time. But for today's limited time we have left together here, if you had to like just rapid fire some things to consider when you're writing your README, what would those be?
Oh, so top things are going to be say what it is. uh, um, use a kind of like start with a sort of template that is very much reader focused. This thing helps you do blank. If that's all you write down, like you are head and shoulders above most READMEs. Links to the other things that are valuable. So if you have other documentation, if you have open issues, that kind of thing. It may feel like, oh yeah, you cloned it from GitHub, like of course it's going to be no. Stuff gets weirdly decontextualized. It gets stuffed into like a vendor folder somewhere. You have no idea where this came from. Give folks a link back to where this project lives, so where they can get the kind of latest and greatest. I think that's a key one. And then lastly, set some expectations, especially if it's an open source thing. Say like, this is a maintained project. I'm working on this, over here, or we're working on this, to identify some maintainers, or to say like, this is not maintained, or this is a demo that is like mostly static. Set those expectations. And I think if you just do like a few of those things, you'll be doing really, really well. My README template, or not really a template so much as a checklist, the README checklist is really kind of focused on like hitting those most important things early on, and it was created as part of like a conference talk that I did, where I did a bunch of research into like kind of the top projects at the time on GitHub, and looked at all their READMEs. And the good news, well, the bad news is lots of READMEs are really terrible and like have like really missing like essential stuff. The good news is a lot of READMEs are really terrible and missing essential stuff. So if you just do a few things, you are going to be just an absolute star.
Yeah, so like they always say there's an app for that. So in this case, there's a repo for that, right? And I will link to that one from Chile now, so that people can get their checklist. So they can follow some of the stuff I've put in there, but then they can also go check out your checklist. Well, Daniel, as I expected, this was super, and this is really, really great. I enjoyed every minute of the almost hour and a half that we've been talking. And so, in conclusion, how can people find and support you?
If you head over to ddbeck.com, that's where you'll find my latest writing and links to my like social accounts and even an email. I love to hear from folks.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Daniel. Thanks for all the work you do. Thanks for all the learnings you're putting out there, all your contributions to open source. It is people like you that make open source great. So thanks.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Mechanical Ink podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Have something to add? Continue the conversation on GitHub and join the community on Slack. Until the next one, keep all the things open.